Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. First thing up is I'd like a motion to accept the minutes from February 23rd.
So moved.
Moved by Brian, seconded by Dan and Jim. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Next up, Laura, did you want to introduce your speaker?
Sure. I'm Jeff Speak from the from New York DEC, actually has a presentation to discuss both community forestry and ash borer and some of the forestry issues. So I will turn it over to Jeff.
Thank you. I think I have to do something. I can just hit the screen share button, right? Laura, is that it?
I believe it's set up that way, yes.
All right. I'm hoping that I just loaded a PowerPoint.
You did.
Okay, and I think, okay, all right. Let me just make sure. Okay, all right, good afternoon, everybody. I have actually created two different PowerPoints just from different conversations that I was having about being able to speak to you all. And the first thing I wanted to make sure is that I introduce the program that I work with the DEC, and then in particular, maybe spend a couple minutes on the emerald ash borer. So by way of a second introduction, I'm a forester with the New York State Environmental Conservation. I'm also an arborist and a few other credentials along the way over the years. As it relates to what I'm doing today, I'm the co-chair of the Region 5 DEC's Relief Committee, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we move through the presentation. Pam Landy with Washington County is also on our committee, and she actually gave me some information about being able to make this presentation today. So just want to thank her as well. That's the logo of our New York Relief Committee, and I'll share this several times through the presentation. I'll talk a little bit more as I go. For us within the DEC, the Region 5 office is the 8 counties, roughly 600,000 people. And for us, in my program involves about 70 plus communities that I work with. You'll have to excuse me, that was very funny. You couldn't hear it, but my cat just came running onto the front porch with a chipmunk in his mouth and just ran into the house with it. So I'll deal with that later.
We're now awake.
Gotta love Zoom, right?
One part of working from home, things I don't get to see at my regular office. So anyway, 70 plus communities here. And part of what I'm working on and working with is that actually within these counties and all the communities, I have only been able to identify one community that has a tree care professional on the payroll, and very few of the communities that are within the counties here actually have a tree board, tree commission, tree committee of any kind officially within the local governments. So it's something we're working on and trying to help with. Urban community forestry is the name of the program, and I rarely emphasize the word urban when I'm working in this region, simply because it really typically scares people and makes them think of the big city centers, although every community has some urban component. So we spend a lot more time talking about how to manage our community forests, regardless of where they, what part of the state or nation that we're in. And just the stovepipe, you know, how I fit into the DEC, multiple layers of management from the agency's name itself all the way down finally to get into the urban and community forestry program. Many people deal with the DEC through permits or through our other foresters that work on preserved land or private lands, but I'm also in that Bureau of Forest Natural Resource Management, and then inside there, private lands in the urban program. This is where, you know, the urban program, we talk about trees. This is what sometimes people are thinking of is, you know, all the buildings and a few trees scattered around, and what do these trees actually do? But it also pertains in any other community as well. This happens to be, you know, Lower Manhattan at the World Trade Center, where we actually worked with them on the planting of those swamp white oak trees there in Lower Manhattan. And that's actually considered, you know, a small urban forest right there at the World Trade Center plazas. So the reason to bring this information is just to show you some of the things that our urban community forestry program can offer. One of the things, and we're successful in getting 3 grants in the region this year. We have no match grants through one of our partners that provide up to $1,000 to communities that are looking to become organized and working towards becoming a Tree City USA. It was a very nice, it's a 1-page application for the $1,000 grant. It's no match. It helps them purchase trees and supplies, host an event, and really get a group of folks organized and excited about getting their community ready to become a tree city. We also have, through regular New York State EPF funding, grants almost every year. This year, we're still, of course, waiting to see what the budget will look like. Not all that hopeful that we'll have the grant money this year, but you never know. We have grants that come in 5 categories. And typically what we want to do is encourage communities to start by doing a tree inventory, find out what they own, and then get a management plan written to help them manage what they own, and then move on from there into tree planting, tree stewardship. And there's also an education component that we have grants, that we provide grants for. The first 2 grants, inventory and community management plans, those are no match grants. The communities apply, they receive the funding. It's done on contract. We pay the contractors, and you receive the inventory and the management plan. The next 2 do have components of match in them, and match is a pretty liberal term for most of these grants, but there is a requirement to have some type of match. I think it's 25% for the tree planting and tree stewardship. And we try to get everyone involved through our relief committee. The relief committee, through the DEC and through federal funding, exists in each of the regions. It involves professionals, volunteers, and anybody else from the community that's interested in their community trees. So we have a broad selection of folks that get involved, from retired people that are interested to tree wardens in the community to the actual tree supervisors and arborists from different communities that come to these meetings and participate. We just got the committee going for the first time in this region 2 years ago. So it's still moving forward, but we've had great interest, and I think we're doing very well just with the number of grants that go out now and people that attend the workshops. I think everyone has either heard of or seen the Tree City USA plaques that go in front of town halls, and also the Arbor Day program. The Arbor Day Foundation supports the Tree City program, and we support the Tree City program, helping people to get organized and become a Tree City USA. It's a really nice program. It recognizes the efforts that most communities are already putting in. They just didn't know they were doing it. So once they start to fill out the application, they realize that they're mostly already have completed what's required to become a Tree City. Again, there's relief, our logo, some of the things that we also work with relief to try and share information into the communities, and especially here now, because we have hemlock woolly adelgid, Lake George, we've got emerald ash borer in Warren County, probably Washington County as well, Saratoga County. Another find in Saratoga County here a few months ago, right on Route 50. Gypsy moth was a problem last summer, so it will probably be quite a problem this spring. Spotted lanternfly hasn't made it this far north yet that we know of, but it's in lower New York and moving. Oak wilt right in the Capital District. And then all the plant issues that we're also always participating in. So we try to share education on these topics. When we host workshops, we always get a forest health speaker to come and give updates. We actually are planning a spring workshop where we'll have some updates on these topics. That's the emerald ash borer. It fits on the head of a penny with room to spare. He's typically only outside for a few days a year, but they do massive damage. The reason for the woodpecker in the picture there is just to let you know that once the emerald ash borers are in the trees, they're pretty great snacks for these woodpeckers, and they're a great sign to help find if we have emerald ash borer in the trees. When these woodpeckers start to rip the trees apart, it lets us spend a little more time looking. That's a gypsy moth, and you can barely see the egg sac under it, but that's the egg mass under it. In many places, that's going to be a problem this spring. And then the oak defoliation from those. There's the hemlock woolly adelgid, Everybody's seen all the stories this past year, and even upcoming now and into the current year for the treatments that'll go on in Lake George. That's the beautiful looking spotted lanternfly. Quite a nasty pest, quite a problem when it arrives. Arbor Day Foundation. Through the Arbor Day Foundation and with our New York State Relief Program, we sponsor the Arbor Day Poster Contest every year for the adult artwork poster, as well as typically for the 5th grade children's posters. We support tree plantings for Arbor Day and other community events that people like to do. I've spoken at parades and school projects that go on. So anything that people are interested in working on for Arbor Day, we want to be able to help. And we also have that grant that I was talking about. That's just an example of one of the events that was held in Central New York. A group of school kids there. They had become a tree city, so they were getting recognized for that. And they were getting ready to plant the potted tree that you can see in the background as part of that. So it was a really neat thing. That flag gets to be flown at the town hall. I don't know if you all can see, I have something on my screen that I don't understand. Hopefully it's not on yours. Can't figure that. Oh, okay. Well, that's one of the Arbor Day posters from a couple of years ago. Typically we get people that are quite the nature photographers that submit. And the new poster for this year just arrived in my office in Warrensburg, so I have those available. We get those out at our speaking events, but we also have them where we can mail them out to folks that want them. More information, of course, on our website about that. That's just a tree planting last year that I participated in for Arbor Day. Group wanted to get a couple trees into a park, and they pre-dug the hole, had a ceremony, had some volunteers help to get the tree planted. And I think they had also received one of those community grants to purchase the tree. In this region, we're very lucky that we've got so many groups involved with the Tree City program and the Tree Campus program. This year, we just had our Tree City annual recognition ceremony. We had several communities that have become Tree Cities. One that we're hoping will make it, Lake George had just gotten their paperwork in, and the Tree Campuses with SUNY ACC, Paul Smiths, and Skidmore. So it really is neat to see all these groups get recognition for the work they're doing, and several more that are trying to work on it, including South Glens Falls. It's just some of the things I've already mentioned, but the relief committee that we have, we help with Tree City, the grants. We do a lot of assistance when a group wants to apply for a grant. We offer as much as we can right up to the moment they submit. And of course, on forest health topics, we have our forest health lab in Delmar, New York, and quite a staff there that does work for everyone across the state. So if there are questions, we can always go to the lab to get the help from the professionals. Just another example of when we're out tabling at an event, that's typically what I set up, something like that. And we're there to take questions and help public with any questions they have about our programs. This was actually a workshop that we had done a couple of years ago, the ash trees that we were looking at, and it's hard to see, but in the lower right corner, the gentleman that's touching the tree actually has an injection set up there for injecting the ash trees to prevent the emerald ash borer from destroying the tree. So we had a group of folks together. Several of those are DEC foresters and others that were just learning more about the program. One of the reasons that we try to get communities organized is when these storms happen so that they can be better prepared, maybe to have gotten rid of some of the hazards prior, and also to get the funding they need to do the maintenance so that the storms, when they do happen, aren't nearly as bad as they could be for the tree canopy and for the community. On the grants, I'm not sure if everyone has heard of the New York State Grants Gateway. If you have not, and you're considering a grant, it is the New York State method for applying grants from all the agencies and authorities. It certainly requires someone to manage the grant itself and to work with us directly. You really need to have someone that's going to commit to that and make sure that the organization that's applying has the capacity to spend the time to manage the grant. Most of ours are 2 years, some require a match. And then everything else I had already mentioned. With our, what I consider successful projects, especially the tree inventory and community forest management plans, once they apply, those are pretty much guaranteed because we're hiring a contractor to do the work. So the community is getting that benefit directly with no match from them and just the time invested in the grant application. And then we always, as I say, talk about forest health and what communities to get more prepared for when these problems come. And with hemlock woolly adelgid and emerald ash borer in particular, there's no special financial support coming from the governments. So when these problems arrive in the communities on their own to figure out how to manage and how to find the funding or create the funding. So if you know what you own, that makes it a little bit easier to figure out how to move forward on that. These are just examples that I see and hear all the time that communities have problems and they want to address. These are some of the things that we can help with our grants, you know, the broken sidewalks from the uplifting tree roots, trees that in the second picture that are involved in the power lines and causing trouble. We often refer to that as right tree, right place, or right tree, wrong place. But regardless, figuring out what to do with those. This is a biggie here. Actually working with the community now regarding problems like this, how to address this and get the funding through the grants to help with some of it. This is something none of us ever want to see, but we've all seen it. And again, try to work with our grants program to help with maintenance and with tree selection, species selection, so these things don't happen. Washington County, I did some quick research, and this is just some of what I saw: the population, the acres, the number of communities, the number of miles of road, or possible to have trees along all those roads. And then because of the emerald ash borer problem coming up, just want to know if people know if there are plans on how it's going to be managed moving forward in the community. Talked a lot about the relief committee already. On top of what I've said, we have a rotating co-chair system. So every 2 or 3 years, we get a new co-chair from the committee. Right now, it's the arborist out of Saratoga Springs. We host regionally a workshop and then annually a statewide conference. And we also have the partner of the New York State Urban Forest Council. And a lot of our funding comes through U.S. Forest Service to provide these programs out to the community. There's the Urban Forest Council. And that's just a trick question if anybody knows who that person is here related to Lake George. It's a picture from the conservationist several years ago. That's Winnie LaRose. There's several plaques in Lake George dedicated to her around the lake. That was everything I wanted to share on the program itself. I'm not sure, Laura, how we are on time or anything else for that matter, if I should take questions or just move on very quickly, or if I should be done.
I would say, yeah, go ahead and ask the committee if there are any questions.
Are these grants
All right.
that you
Well,
have, are the grants that you listed, are they strictly for municipalities, or are they also for organizations within the county?
Therefore, not-for-profit organizations as well as governments. So we have everything from cemeteries, churches, organized community groups, and the governments themselves that apply for the grants.
How do I get it so I can see everybody? I can't see everybody
All right.
to see if there's questions, so we have to wait a minute.
Oh, that's fine. I just don't want
You
to
get
take
to
too much
unshare your
time.
screen, Jim.
Jim, can you unshare your screen? Take down the presentation.
Debbie's fixing it from this side. It won't.
Are we moving?
Does anybody have a question? Just speak up. We won't do it organized.
Cassie, I have a question.
Go ahead, Jim.
All right, it's Jim, right?
Yep.
Thank you very much, Jim. So I sit in southern Washington County. I'm on the border of southern Vermont. There's 2 confirmed infested areas right along my border of my township. And I have some concerned citizens that want to know what we're going to do with the emerald ash borer situation that's currently sitting right along two thoroughfares that go right into Vermont. So what is our plan? What do I need to do to help our citizens with a plan? Because these ash borers don't know boundaries like the federal government does. So.
No, they don't. And that's part of what I wanted to make sure we talk about today. And it's one of the questions I always ask is, what is the plan from your government, from your community for Emerald Ash Borer. It's been in discussion since early 2000s. So everyone should at least have heard of it and hopefully have some type of plan, or at least have looked at a plan from another government to know what needs to get done. If you're not aware of anything at all, then we have templates and ideas on how to help you get a plan going for your community. By the time the insect is found, it's already generally peaked in its population in the community. And it really becomes a problem within a few years' time of having so many standing dead trees. So I don't know what your plan is. I'm encouraging people to get a plan and look at maybe the New York State plan, the National Grid plan. Other communities have plans. New York City wrote their own plan, of course, from managing all their Emerald Ash Borer issues. And I can share more information with you after this meeting about that and about those resources.
Okay. I'll follow up with you. I'll send you an email, Jim.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions? I see no questions on at this point.
Okay. If we're going to do a little bit more information on Emerald Ash Borer, I'm happy to do that now, but up to you guys how you are on time.
Maybe we can, if anybody wants the information, they can reach out to you and you could send it to them that way? Does that work for you?
Yes, that's just fine. Yep. I will say, I believe it's critically important that any local government, county governments, all learn as much as they possibly can, as fast as they can about Emerald Ash Borer now that it's been found in the communities, and get ready for the financial concerns that it's going to bring. So that said, I'm happy to share more information at another time.
Or
And
do you have the information all in, and you could forward it on to all of us through the email? Or forward it on to Laura and she can pass it on, one or the other?
yes, yep, I actually have
Okay, why don't we do that? That'll work good.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, so I'm going to introduce Chris Belden. Chris is with the Lake Champlain or Champlain George, depending on what order you like it in, Regional Planning Board. He's joined the board as a planner and is going to be discussing the climate smart communities. You all are aware, we had a presentation from NYSERDA last month on the clean energy program. There are some definite synergies between the two programs, but they are different. I'm going to let Chris kind of go into that during his presentation, but sort of the short version is the Clean Energy Community Program that you saw last month is essentially targeted at reducing energy use, whereas the Climate Smart Communities is sort of sustainability, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and long-term sustainability. So with that, I'll let Chris give you some of the specifics of the program.
Thank you, Laura. I'm going to, share with everyone my screen. So Laura, Laura had reached out to us, knowing that I, in a previous life, had helped get the Climate Smart Communities program started in Warren County. We were able to get the county their program certified bronze last year, and so we wanted to kind of just discuss with you guys the possible benefits to becoming involved with the program and the grants that come along with it. So, but before I get into the specifics of the program, I wanted to just touch on some of the priorities the state has and how that may impact decisions that the county makes going forward. So if you weren't familiar with the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, it was enacted back in 2019 and set a whole host of energy reduction targets statewide. So some of them are on the screen here. Very ambitious. They want to be They want us to be generating 70% renewable energy by the end of the decade, and then within 20 years be off fossil fuels completely. And so and the reason I bring that up is just because I think it can be inferred that with these targets, we are going to be seeing different incentives, grants, and so on coming down the pike over the next decade. Part of what that what the law did was it formed the State Climate Action Council. So they've been meeting since I think last fall, and they're tasked with developing a scoping plan that will set statewide, sector-based policies and recommend legislation that will advance the strategies identified in that plan. And they are working with a few subgroups that are providing input, public outreach about within these different advisory panel areas. So that's probably as much I want to spend on that, the act and so on, but I'd be happy before I move on to answer any questions if anybody has anything. Okay. So yeah, Laura mentioned that the NYSERDA program and the DEC program are related. The impact actions that Jill was up discussing last month, those actions do get you credit if you choose to go through the certification process with DEC within climate smart communities, but there's no need to do one or the other. Just I think if you're taking advantage of either of them, you're going to find benefits either way. And so where this program differs from the clean energy program is the focus is not on the energy production, the sources of energy production and use, but rather on how communities can leverage resources and so on to reduce the impacts that are projected from climate change. So, more intense storms, more high heat days, what are we doing? What are we doing locally to mitigate those risks? And then the other half of it is how we can mitigate greenhouse gas emissions either through modernizing refrigeration. So we're using more environmentally friendly refrigerants, or even the program funds things like sidewalks and multi-use trails. So again, getting people off of the road and getting them to walk places and so on, reducing our greenhouse gas, but also a benefit to our communities. I mentioned certification. Certification is optional for communities, but if you do go down that path and you become a certified bronze or silver community, you do get yourself an advantage when you go to apply for funding. I'll talk about the pledge. So I'll flip back here real quick. You can see where on that chart there where it says registered 3 points, what that's referring to is for communities that take the Climate Smart Communities Pledge and register with the state. When you go to apply for funding through DEC, you will be walking in with 3 points towards your application because you are a registered community, and so on and so forth. If you move up the certification ranking, that you're in, and where that's important is, these are competitive grants that are done on a statewide basis. So, every bit of point you can gather helps. The pledge itself is part of the packet I sent over to Laura, and she distributed. I've included a model resolution that Warren County adopted. Obviously, I changed the county's information and so on. As it mentions on there, you do not need to adopt the preamble and the way that it's written. You can make changes to that. However, the last 10, these 10 pledge items need to be included in your resolution if the board does consider doing that. I will add, I know one of the concerns we had in Warren County was, by taking this pledge, are we obligating ourselves to anything? Are we ceding our home rule authority to New York State? And the answer that we came to was no. We're not. It's not obligatory. It's all optional. And from my experience, it's about making your program making it what you want it, and not, it's not a top-down approach. It's what you want to make it, what you, Washington County, want to make it. And so these are, in terms of the benefits of the program, it comes down to money, I think, being, a principal driver for a lot of communities. Obviously there's the idea to improve the environment as much as we can. Where this, I think, is where it can also be beneficial to communities is getting money for different infrastructure projects that you may already be considering. So I put a couple examples that were funded just a couple of years ago, but it includes things like replacing culverts and making sure they're appropriately sized for the storm events we're likely to see in the next couple decades. Relocating critical infrastructure that's within floodplains, drainage upgrades, sidewalks, adding AC into community centers so that you can send people to a site when temperatures get too extreme for folks. So those grants for the implementation side of things, replacing culverts and that sort of thing, communities are eligible to apply for up to $2 million in grant funding. And then for more of the planning and assessment type projects, you're looking at up to $100,000 in funding, potentially. So, and like I mentioned, I think the first step for communities is to take the pledge and become registered. It's not committing you to anything, but you are at least walking in with an advantage if you do consider to apply for funding. And that, from what I've heard, it's looking like there's going to be another consolidated funding round coming up in 2021. So, I think obviously I'm not, I'm here just to kind of discuss the program, explain how we might be able to help. So I'm not asking for anything to be committed to today, but certainly over the next few months, if you're considering this, it might be a good idea to take that step so you're put it more of an advantage. And then, if you do consider to, if this is something that the board is agreeable to, I think, where you'd want to position yourself is to appoint someone who's your principal contact at the county to help oversee the county's program, and establish a small working group that you can workshop ideas around, and then bring those back to your committees to fully flesh out. So I know that was a lot of information. I tried to put a lot of the information I put on here in the handout that Laura emailed out. But I guess if there's any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, Chris. So my first question is, when you talk about the grant funding between the two different types, whether DEC or NYSERDA, they're stackable for number one. But when you talk about the points, like 3, 6, and 8 was certified bronze, and whatever the next one was, silver, probably. Are they stacked? So is it like 3 points, and the next one is 6, so it's 9 together, and then if you go to the next, it's 17 together, or is 3, 6, 8 the actual number as you rise to the next level?
Good question. So, and I realize the point discussion can definitely become a little complicated because each program uses points. And what I was referring to in that was those points were related to the consolidated funding application scoring. So how, if you were to apply to DEC's Climate Smart program for culvert replacements, when you apply to the state, if you're a registered community or certified bronze or silver, those points are being added onto your application. And so it's not about,
Okay,
yeah,
so that's on a CFA grant, not a DEC grant.
same thing, same thing.
Same thing, okay.
This context, yeah.
Yep.
John?
Oh, we've got, if the county goes for this, should the local townships go for it? Because we do have Dresden and Putnam right on Lake George, and
Yep.
there's several culverts up there. So would it be okay just for the county or the township?
The idea is, I mean, we here at the Regional Planning Board, we'd certainly help any community, we're not just helping counties. It's for any municipality. So towns, villages, cities, counties, all of them can participate. Yes. So I guess the answer is yes, you can participate. And if it's something that you'd like me or somebody else here to come up and give a presentation or discussion to your town board, that's something we can entertain as well.
John?
Use that same resolution that you give to
Yes.
Warren County to Washington
Yeah.
County as a local township?
Yep. Yeah, as long as you keep those last 10 pledge items, you're golden. So you can change that preamble about why this resolution is important. You can change that to reflect what the intent of your board is. But yes, you can use that model resolution, or we can help with language too.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Dan?
Yeah, Chris, if the town and the county were to merge on a new highway barn and reduce energy use, would that qualify for one of those grants?
I'd have to look. I guess it depends on what you were doing. And I will say too, with the Climate Smart Communities program, they being DEC releases a request for applications. Typically it'd be every May. Last year was a hiccup, but in that RFA, they'll specify what types of actions they're willing to fund. But I would be happy. I can share it with Laura, and she can distribute the most recent request for applications that was done back in 19, and just to kind of give you an idea of what could be funded. But if it can't be funded through Climate Smart, there are other programs through NYSERDA and other agencies that you can certainly take advantage of. I know one of the programs I've discussed with both, I think, Brian and Melissa has been about the new construction program through NYSERDA that can provide some assistance with kind of your heating and cooling needs, providing funding to offset either technical assistance and installation of that equipment. So there's the Climate Smart Communities program, I think, is a piece of that. That said, though, I think certain things like constructing a new building that's energy efficient or has geothermal or solar panels, those types of actions can get you points and credit towards your bronze or silver certification. So just because it doesn't just because certain action may not qualify for grants through the program, there may be a tangential benefit to doing it anyways. So
Thank you.
Matt?
Besides lowering our score as we go for grants, what's the downside of not doing this? or I guess the question is, by doing this, what are we committing to?
Right, yeah.
That we have to fulfill going forward, that we may not have discussed or understand the ramifications thereof.
Well, so I guess how our board and the county attorney in Warren County thought about this was the language of that resolution the board made did not obligate them to anything. It was a pledge to advance, a pledge to decrease energy use and to shift to clean and renewable energy, implement climate smart land use. So there's really some of these high level pledges that you're making. So it's not necessarily tying your hands. If you're taking an action that's counter to these things, it's not going to get you kicked out of the program, so to speak. I don't know if that answered your question or not, Supervisor.
Well, I guess I'm just feeling a little burned over the years by the state taking a little bag of candy in front of you and saying, come over here, little boy, here's some candy for you. And you come over, just sign here, you can have the candy. And then you find out later on the price you paid for grabbing that candy. Oh, by the way, now this whole program is on you because you've committed, I don't know. I'm just a little uncomfortable with the whole thing. It feels a little.
It's more non-binding, is that right, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a local resolution that you're making. If you become
a pledge that you're going to look in that direction, that you're going to make an effort. That's all. I think that's the way I read it, but I'm not sure that's what it is. But I think that's the way I read it.
And I mean, there's nothing requiring you to join. I think it's just a decision, a consideration that you got to kind of weigh things. I think where I saw the benefit, when I first learned about the program, where I saw the benefit was it's another avenue for getting your hands on some funding for infrastructure. Just another tool in your tool belt for going after funding. So you're not hitting the same you're not hitting the same wells of funding. And like I mentioned in the top of the presentation, the state, and this is not just an executive decision, but the legislature is also looking to make some changes in how they roll out clean energy programs and programs around resiliency. So I think what we can kind of interpret from that is there's going to be some heavy investment coming from the state over the next few years, and I guess it's optional. But if you're there and you're taking part in these programs, you are just helping your hand. You're helping yourself get your hands on that funding.
I get it, and I see the upside, but I'm now committing, I'm pledging to say that I'm going to inventory our county's emissions. And I'm going to inventory that by then set goals to do what we need to do to either decrease our energy use or shift to clean energy. I'm making a commitment here. I want to know how solid this is, because this is not just trivial. And I'm being cynical on this whole thing.
It should be.
But
yeah.
I'm a little reluctant to make commitments on something I don't know if we can handle or we want to do, I guess.
If we entered in this, can we go buy a glider truck?
A what truck?
A glider truck, one that uses the old engine that burns fuel and no emissions involved.
You do whatever you want to do. No, I guess in all seriousness, you're right. I mean, I totally get the apprehension. That was something we considered across the board in Warren County. So I guess what I would say is, have that discussion, I guess, with the county attorney's office and the administrator's office, and really, wrap your heads around what you think is the best direction for the county.
Okay, I mean, implement climate smart land use. Now, we want to do something with some piece of county property going forward. Now we have rules and regulations. We just can't do what we want. We've already committed to being part of this, so now we have to look at it from a whole different perspective. You can't use the land like you thought you were going to use it. You have to do it this way now because you have to consider emissions and set goals and reduce energy. I don't know. I'm just
I'm
just really uncomfortable in this whole thing. It's probably a great program. It's just rubs me the wrong way.
So Granville will be your first stop.
Okay, Sue?
And don't we do that anyways? We look at design and outcome, and any project that we're doing, we kind of do the same thing without having these set of guidelines?
Was that a question for myself?
For Matt.
Oh, okay.
Well, when we build a new highway garage, Sue, are we gonna shift to clean and renewable energy? Are we gonna put solar panels and geothermal? We're gonna completely change the way we do energy for those new buildings? And we use climate smart management materials? Are we gonna pay more for materials that are climate smart instead of building it the way we wanna build it? 'Cause that's what I think we're committing to.
I think that you're looking at, saying that you're gonna look at two different ways, two different paths now. I don't think that means it's obligation. I think that's what it's saying. There's two different ways to look at this now.
Well, and I guess,
Gotta do what's best for the county.
When I pledge to do something, I'm obligating to do it, aren't I?
Yeah, but I think more if you just, like Brian, he's gonna get price on the one kind of car and the price on the other kind of car. So if anybody came back and said, well, you didn't try and be a clean community, well, yeah, he did. We looked at what the car would cost and decided against it. And so you've done it, you just weren't obligated to buy it.
Well, and I
I guess
think
the way I would take it.
And I would take it that we're pledging to not just look at it, we're gonna do it. This is doing stuff. I'm pledging to do stuff.
Well,
We're not deciding today.
I think
We're
Chris
talking
is
about
gonna explain the difference there, because I think Sue and Matt are both right. I think Sue's right that in our due diligence, we look at both anyway, and if we decide that the other one's too expensive and where there's no savings, we're probably gonna stick with the old way. Am I kind of online, Chris? Is that where?
yeah, and I guess what's important to note too is some state programs, I'm thinking of like local water revitalization program. If you become a community like that, so I think that would include Whitehall. Certain projects, when they come before a board or come before the board, they will have to consider certain things as they relate to a local waterfront. That type of mechanism is not in place with Climate Smart. So in terms of these pledges, this pledge that you're making, I guess what you're committing to is that you're going to reason these things, not that you're going to have to, unless you develop a policy that says as much. So if you're going to build a highway barn, you've made this pledge. It's not asking you then to go and to kind of look at two different scenarios, a green scenario versus a non-green scenario. This is just a commitment that your board is taking a stand towards addressing these issues. But then again, I have no legal background, and I would defer to your counsel to make that call. But that's the experience I've had. And there's several hundred communities and more, and I'm sorry, in New York State that have just taken that pledge step. So it's definitely been a concern that I've heard, but not a concern that I have seen borne out that way. So if that answers anything for you.
Okay, do we have any more questions? I don't see any, so I guess thank you for your presentation today, Chris.
Okay. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
And now I'll introduce Laura Oswald, our tourism economic developer. So your turn, Laura.
And whatever the job of the day is.
Yeah, whatever we can shove your direction.
Yes. I just have a few general updates for you today, in no particular order. I'm starting out with planning. We have had a continuing discussion on the status of the solid waste management plan. I will tell you that we did actually have some success with reaching out to DEC and requesting that they provide us access to the data that we know that they have, that we have no real way of going and obtaining. There was some back and forth and some concerns about that, but at the end of the day, they have provided us with some data. So Based on the recommendations that I shared with you at, I think, the meeting 2 months ago, we are in the process of doing our best to update the plan to meet the DEC requests. And then the next step will be to find out if they approve it or if they send us back to the drawing board and ask us to go get something else. We'll see when we get a little bit closer. But the good news is we at least, we made some headway with them and, are proceeding. Also on planning, as many of you are aware, once again, solar, both community solar, large solar arrays, and smaller solar systems are once again an extremely hot topic across the county. Because, and as you know, we typically arrange planning board trainings throughout the year, but because of COVID, we were not able to do certainly any in-person training. So we provided access to standard trainings that the state was providing. But because solar in particular has become, again, such a hot topic, we've had a few communities, starting with Cambridge, request specific trainings for their planning and zoning boards focusing on solar. So what we are in the process of doing, and by we, it's the royal we, that would actually be Pamela, is trying to schedule 2 or 3 different solar specific trainings with a few communities at a time so that there's plenty of time. Obviously, this is going to be done through technology, not in person. But that way there's room for board members to actually ask questions and participate in discussion. So we're going to sort of start out probably with the Cambridge, Jackson, Easton area, probably do, center of the county and then one maybe further north so that there's only a few communities at a time. But your planning boards and zoning boards will be hearing from us with invites for the trainings that will be held specifically on our behalf by Department of State. Any questions on that? Tourism. Just to give you an update on what's happening with tourism, you are all aware that our tourism contract is actually with Black Dog. The other agencies and entities that were used are all contracted through Black Dog. Andrew Meter was a contractor who, again, was contracted with Black Dog. And he basically has moved on. He has contracts with other entities that I believe he's has expanded on. And Andrew is going to be replaced by a gentleman by the name of Mike Wood. Mike is a longtime 30-year plus Washington County resident. He lives on the Kingsbury-Fort Edward border. You will meet him next month because we're going to sort of do the summary of 2020 activities and then talk about planning for the rest of the 2021 year as the county businesses and tourism starts opening up again. So again, you'll have a chance to interact with him next month. So the other thing on my list is CDBG. I sent everybody out a document that sort of gave you the changes in community-wide eligibility. So with CDBG funding, in order to have what's called an area-wide benefit, which means geographically it's typically an entire town or an entire village, or it can also be a census block group. At least 51% of the households in that geography have to be at or below 80% of the area median income. So the area median income in our case is actually the county median income, which for 2020 was, as you can expect, it went down a little bit from 2019. It was just under 57,000. So on the document that I sent you, that HUD actually only updates this eligibility form every few years. There were a few changes in terms of some communities that became eligible that previously weren't, and some communities that are no longer eligible. When I say they're no longer eligible, what it means is that they are no longer eligible based on the HUD definitions of low income. So for example, the village of Cambridge, which in 2019 they were actually one of the highest highest low-income communities, if that makes sense. That is likely that those statistics were probably related to the closure of McClellan, and that effect has probably dissipated somewhat. And Cambridge now has a 38% LMI eligibility compared to their former 57. If you are a community who has had that status change, and you believe that it's incorrect, the remedy for that is to actually do an income survey. Again, I go back, and I know I have harped on this before, that statistically, the smaller the population that is being shown up in this census data, the more likely there is for errors. This data comes from American Community Survey data that goes out every few years, and then HUD compiles it and then sort of does their calculations based on that. So you will notice on the 2021 eligibility, as of right now, there is one village, which is the village of Whitehall, and two towns, which are the Fort Edward and the town of Whitehall, that are eligible in their entirety. In other words, the entire community meets that low income threshold. In addition, there are several census block groups, as opposed to entire communities, that are also eligible. So bottom line, what that means is that if you're going to do a CDBG application, you have to prove that there is benefit to the geography that you're applying for, whether it's the block group or the entire town or the entire village. Or again, you can also survey. So also want to say congratulations to the town of Cambridge and the town of Easton, because according to this data, they are actually the two wealthiest communities. So unfortunately for you, you're not eligible for CDBG area-wide income. Fortunately for you, you don't have the same poverty levels that some other communities do. For those supervisors who want some more information about where the census tract and block groups are that I've highlighted here, Heather Weller is mapping them so we can show you exactly where that geography is within your county or your community. So the reason that I just went into that long explanation, and the reason that that is important, is twofold. As we all know, with COVID, between federal funding and state funding, there is more and more funding coming out. Many times you've got crossover of eligibility. And one of the things that I think that we're going to start seeing, infrastructure, broadband are again, very significant concerns. So you've now got many federal and state programs that are going to allow funding for that. There's going to be a point where there's going to have to be demonstration that you're not, the old term is double dipping, that you're not asking multiple programs for the same money to pay for the same things. CDBG just released at the end of this week a funding announcement. This actually came from the CARES Act funding. It's not the new American Recovery funding. It's essentially emergency recovery funding for eligible communities for some very specific things. The money can be used to support small businesses. It can be used to improve air quality in public facilities. Environmental improvements. So if we've got like housing shelters or emergency shelters, it can be used for that. It can also be used for public services, such as providing mental health, vaccine outreach, broadband connectivity for underserved communities. Again, and that's why I say, so broadband is eligible here, but it's also eligible in several other places. And with CDBG, and I think we're going to start seeing this with other types of funding, there's actually an affidavit in there that requires that you certify that you haven't asked for this funding for this project from some other source of funding. That is different than stacked funding. So that say you have $1 million project and you ask for $500,000 from one program and $500,000 from another. That's different than asking for the same million from two different programs. In addition to the CARES Act funding, CDBG will be included in the upcoming CFA round. Again, the state budget is not final, but as of right now, there still is funding for CFAs. If anybody is considering doing a CDBG application, a public hearing is required. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to mention it now, because as a community, you might want to get it on your agenda, because the hearing essentially is meant to describe what your project is, inform the public that you're intending to ask for funds for this particular project before you put the application in. So any questions on CDBG in particular? Okay. One of the, again, kind of going back to the multiple funding sources, again, there's still leftover CARES Act money out there. CFA funding, if it follows the typical procedure, once the budget is finalized in April, CFA portals typically open sometime in May, and then applications are typically due June, July. We all are very aware of the local government assistance portion of the American Recovery Act, which, as I believe, we're all still waiting for more guidance on details in terms of how that money can be used. There's also the Build Better Act that President Biden is working on that potentially will put a lot of money out there towards infrastructure. And another funding source that's out there right now is the Northern Borders Regional Commission. So again, a lot of this is federal funding. There will be federal funding with similar programs that will allow funding for similar things like broadband or wastewater. And then there will also be state funding to match. So basically, I just want to point out that, you know, it's going to take some coordination both at the county level for projects that are critical to the county and at the local community level, because there are going to be so many seemingly contradictory programs that might fund what your needs are. So I would suggest that the first thing is to have that wish list of needs. And then as rules start becoming clearer and clearer on the, you know, the demands of the individual funding programs, then, you know, discussion will ensue about what the right application for the particular project is.
Brian?
So a couple of totally different questions. On the CARES Act, I think there was payment protection plan money in the CARES Act, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and that was in 2 or 3 different phases?
Yes.
So is there still money available for landlords? Is that an opportunity locally or not?
I haven't checked in the past week or so. There was actually some delay in getting the most recent phase of PPP off the ground. Some of that funding was basically available through the end of the year, and some of it was based on first come, first serve. I believe the landlord funding is still open, but I can double check that.
Because we have landlords in the county that are, you know, worried about, you know, getting stimulus money and all that. But I think if we could go that route, that's probably their best route to get funded, but I don't know that. Second question was Northern Borders. Will that fund salt shed type buildings?
Northern Borders will fund infrastructure, yes, and I mean, I'd want to have a discussion about how competitive it would be, but I believe it would be eligible. So
that's something we haven't given much thought to lately, and I know that Bob Hankey's already been relieved of his money in Argyle for his salt shed, but now that there's funding available for the rest of us, we should all be jumping in.
Well, going back to Chris's presentation, you know, thinking about salt sheds, you know, a salt shed is an environmental concern. So this is where, you know, you have so many different programs that can either be stacked or different sources of funding will potentially cover the same project, depending, quite frequently, it will depend on what the ultimate goal of the funding source is. Is it to clean the environment? Is it specific infrastructure money? Is it low income money? I would always tend to go back to the source of the pool of funding, and you can sort of determine where you're likely to be most competitive by understanding what the goals of the program fund are. Even if you've got an eligible project in pot A, it might be more competitive in pot B. And,
Yep.
you know, it's a little tricky because a lot of these funding sources are going to hit us and become available at once. So there's going to be some efforts to trying to determine what are the critical projects, both at the county and the community and the local nonprofit level are, and what the best source of funding is. You know, so for example, through a couple of the proposed funding sources out there, CDBG could potentially be one of them, and the local government funding is potentially one of them. It's meant to assist small businesses. So for example, we could potentially look at some funding that could either be managed through the county, but the difficulty with that is that all of these programs will require management. Like you're not just going to sort of say, any company in the county that's got a problem, line up and we'll write you a check. There's going to have to be some sort of process to manage, you know, who's eligible, how we verify that, how the money goes out. So, you know, potential direct assistance to business could be managed by either an IDA or an LDC, or the county could hire somebody. I mean, I guess I'm saying I foresee a lot of discussions coming up, and some of it is certainly related to the local government funding that we're still waiting, but that's not the only source. There are a lot of other sources out there.
Thank you.
And that's pretty much all I had, unless there are other questions.
Does anybody have any other?
You got James.
James?
Laura, what about our ARC money this month?
So we got another $13,000 this month. So we went, I think it was December, it was somewhere around 7,000 to 13,000 in January, 13,000 in February. So those numbers they're looking good. We like it.
Airbnbs are starting to open up their markets for the summer. So if what Airbnb is telling you that we're going to get paid based on bookings, we should see a pretty significant increase in the next couple months.
I would hope so.
Thank you.
Bob? You were just swatting.
I'm just swatting.
Okay.
Trying to stay awake.
Okay.
I just want to say, Cassie, how appropriate it is you scheduled your meeting on National Ag Day today.
I try. Okay, seeing nothing else before the committee, motion to adjourn, or consider it adjourned. Have a good day.
Bye.
Yeah, Kathy.